Good morning, everyone. Thank you for spending the next hour or so with us. My presentation today is on valuing ecosystem services for beekeepers in Western Australia. And predominantly, I'm presenting the results from the Natural Resources for Beekeepers Questionnaire that we conducted in the 2020-21. This project is by myself and also Associate Professor Ben White, and we've worked under the CRC for honeybee products. It's April Fool's Day today. I really wanted to play a trick on you, but I thought best not to, and I have beehived myself. So I hope you don't get pranked throughout the day. In this presentation, we'll look at the background of the beekeeping industry. I'll present some production values and have a look at the natural resources that are being used and the value of those resources. We'll look at the challenges that the beekeepers are facing and also suggest some policy items that potentially need a bit of review. And all of that will surround or come from our survey results. It won't necessarily all happen in that order, so bear with me, but we'll get through it all. So valuing ecosystem services. We know honeybees are great. They enhance pollination for improved crop yields. They support plant biodiversity and conservation. They provide us with a natural raw material for food, pharmaceuticals, and cosmetics. It also gives us an opportunity to connect with nature and provides environmental education, and for some, real life enrichment. Firstly, in our project, we really needed to understand who were the beekeepers. There's no clear definition of different categories of beekeepers within the industry, within departments, or across Australia. So for our purposes, I've defined the different types of beekeepers. We have a backyard beekeeper. So that's somebody who is using backyard sites and has 2 or less hives. We've got hobbyist-amateur beekeepers, so they're not a backyard beekeeper, so they can have any number of sites, and they have between under 39 hives. We've then got commercial beekeepers who are neither of the above and have any number of sites and more than 40 hives. And a pollinator is any of the above, using any number of sites and any number of hives, but they place their hives in agricultural fields for the purpose of pollination services, and where the honeybees interact with the food and fibre plants at the onset of flowering to produce a seed, nut, fruit, and vegetables, and not for the specific purpose of honey production or bee health. We also found there's no real definition of apiary sites either. So for our purposes, I describe the apiary sites as a backyard site in an urban environment is one where the hive is placed in a populated area where there's parks and garden flora as the primary food source. We've then got registered sites from the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions. So that's lands that they manage. It's the national and conservation parks, state forests, nature timber reserves, pastoral leases, mining tenements, and unallocated crown land. And DBCA manage the apiary permits and licenses here. Then we've got private sites, and that's any privately owned rural land used for honey production. Sorry, I'm dodging my camera here. And not specifically for pollination. And then we've got others. So we've got roadsides, council and shire land, and we've even been told hives get placed at the rubbish tip. So, and then pollination, as I described before. So beekeeping is done all over Western Australia, and in the north, west, Nullarbor and desert regions, it's done for recreational purposes. There's also pollination services going on. And then there's also Indigenous community businesses undertaking beekeeping. In the southwest, beekeepers and apiary sites are widely dispersed across the coastal regions, into the forests, and then across to the wheat belt and desert regions. There's over 4,500 registered DBCA sites, an unknown number of private sites, and an unknown number of pollination sites. So beekeeping in Western Australia particularly is all year round. So it's not like the cold climates where they let their bees die off and then they re-establish their hives for the warmer months when they're out pollinating. The bees are kept alive all year round. So to do that, you also need to be able to provide your bees with enough food source. And if you can't, you've then got to be offering supplement feeding and through syrups and pollen. So in a backyard beekeeper's urban environment, there's pretty much sufficient flowering going on throughout the year. And if your garden is like my garden here, you the backyard beekeepers owe you a jar of honey. So if you're a commercial beekeeper or a hobbyist-amateur, you need to be moving your hives around to feed your bees. So they're moving every 2 to 3 months and they're traveling thousands of kilometers every year. Bees and flora are constrained by weather activity. So they move to the coastal regions to restore the bees' health. They overwinter there, and then it lets the bees build up the colony ready for harvesting in the forests in the warmer months. So the reason they're moving those hives around is essentially they're chasing the flower, they're chasing the nectar flow, provides them with, keeps their bees alive, and provides a return on investment. There's no definite flowering schedule. There's many native species that do not flower each year. And just because they're flowering, it doesn't always mean that there is a nectar flow. So the beekeepers need to have flexibility in their hive movements and also options, plenty of sites that they have the option to use. And different flora provides different benefits to the bees and produces different honey, different volumes, different properties in that honey, and also prices that are related to the type of honey. So to be successful, they need some great decision making, and pretty much that is based on years of experience and knowledge. If we look across Australia-wide, Western Australia has about back in this time, about 3,500 beekeepers, looking at about 15% of Australia, out of all of Australia, but a lower number of hives. We don't have a huge number of hives there. The figures out of DPIRD, when we take a look here, we've got it's booming. In the last 5 years, there's been about 500 new registrations of beekeepers every year. And out of our survey data, we can sort of show there that it is predominantly those backyard beekeepers that are coming on board. We look at more recent data. There's about 4,200 beekeepers in Western Australia. They've now got about 52,000 hives. We're looking at maybe a breakup of 12% backyard beekeepers, hobbyist-amateurs about 25%, commercial at 63%. But the majority of hives are held by those commercial beekeepers. So when we started this project and we went looking for data from about the industry, what's going on, it was lacking, and it left us with more questions than answers. And what the New Zealanders do really well, the Ministry for Primary Industries outsourced the task of monitoring and reporting through surveys for the apiculture industry yearly. And in the last 2 years, they've actually provided that data both in a report and in an Excel format. So if you are in the beekeeping industry and you're interested, it is well worth a look at. The WA and the Australian industry is really lacking in this. So for our purposes, to fill our data gap and information gaps, we took on the opportunity to create a survey. So this was the first industry-wide in-depth beekeeping survey in 30 years. It's the first time that data about the backyard beekeepers and a bit more about the hobbyist and amateur beekeepers has ever been done. It's complex in design, and the display logic was really difficult because I needed to deal with multiple types of beekeepers, beekeeper categories, the types of apiary sites they were using, and I was also dealing with the 9 different IBRA regions. So we just take a look at beekeepers that have only one site, and that is their backyard site. So this isn't necessarily a beekeeper with only one hive, it's just one that only uses their backyard site. So they are all over Western Australia, but if we take a look at the metro area here, this is mapped out by postcode. This is only my survey respondents, but it gives us a look at the number of hives in the postcodes, the amount of honey they're harvesting, and their yield estimates. So we've estimated honey harvested just from these backyard sites is about 23 kilograms per hive. There's about 19% who are producing no honey at this point. If I included those, it drops the average down to 19 kilograms. But because there's so many new beekeepers coming on board, a lot of them are still establishing their hives. Average number of hives in these metro areas is about 2.3 hives per backyard, and they're producing about 38.5 kilograms of honey from each backyard. But if we look at the true definition of a backyard beekeeper, out of our survey, the average number of hives was 1. If we look at their yield, it was about 24 kilograms per hive, and the honey harvested and what they also sold was 32 kilograms per year. And 64% of them were selling, distributing, or consuming that honey. Now, if I apply that to the deepered population figures, we're looking at about 2,000 backyard beekeepers selling, distributing, and consuming honey. So they're producing in total about 65 tonne of honey each year. We're looking at a price between $12 and $14. So they've got a value of about $1 million sitting there. And in our survey, we had asked about future prospects and how many hives you planned on having by 2025. And the answer was 3. So there's the potential here that this is going to triple, producing around 200 tonne at $2.6 million. And in that, we're only assuming that there's no increase in beekeeper numbers and the price remains the same. So with that, a lot of that honey, 86%, is going to friends, family, personal use, and for personal use and consumption. And on the Australian average consumption rate is about 0.67 kilograms per person per year of honey. Me personally, it's about 3 times that amount, but don't worry about that. So potentially, these backyard beekeepers are supplying about 98,000 people in honey each year. And for the future prospects, if we take a look at that, we could, it could be 3 times as much by 2025. In terms of policy and risk, the backyard beekeepers are more prone to being unregistered beekeepers, unregistered hives, and there needs to be more policing, larger penalties to deter this from happening. Some local government agencies also require registration. This is slightly inefficient. It means there's double paperwork, there's double fees. But what it does mean, the benefit of it is we know the location of those hives, which is handy to know because generally hive locations are unknown, and backyard beekeepers are also prone to letting their bees swarm, leave the hive, and end up in tree trunks, sides of houses, and all over the place. So this biosecurity risk is really high here. Main reason is because if there is an incursion, it's likely to be at an airport or the seaport, and that's where most of these beekeepers we're in close proximity in the metro areas. Backyard beekeepers are generally lacking in knowledge and experience to be able to detect the pests and diseases early enough also. And then if there was an eradication program set up, it would be very difficult to find all these hives. We take a look now at the hobbyist-amateur beekeepers. So they've got under the smaller number, more than the backyard beekeeper hives. So in our survey, average number of hives was 8. They're producing about 19 kilograms of honey per hive, and they're producing, harvested 145 kilograms per year, and they sold off 148 kilograms. So maybe there was some in storage from last year. And here we've got 84% selling, distributing, or consuming their honey. If we apply that to the Department of Primary Industries registration numbers, there's about 745 hobbyist-amateur beekeepers selling, distributing, consuming honey. They're producing about 108 tonne of honey per year, around the $10 to $16 mark, and ranging a value of 1.1 million to 1.8 million. In their future prospects, they were planning on having 15 hives by 2025. So there's potential for a doubling there. If we look at their channels, it starts to change. Only 39% is now gifted to family and friends, whereas backyard beekeepers, it was 86%. The hobbyist amateurs are starting to move towards private sales, with 46% of honey going through there, and just 10% starting to use the wholesale processes. So again, these guys could potentially be supplying honey to about 161,000 people, and maybe twice as much by 2025. So for the hobbyist amateurs, they've got more hives, they need more sites, and they then start to move into the bush sites. So they do still have the backyard sites, but they need more. So, and the registered sites, it's really constrained. It's really difficult to break into, because what happens is they're a revolving lease. So it goes back to the existing holders who can renew their lease. So it's really difficult to break into that space. So they move towards the private sites. So they approach rural landholders and farmers directly. They make an arrangement of sorts, whether it is free or for a payment in money or honey. In terms of policy and risk, there's some real barriers to expanding to commercial side, purely because of access to those apiary sites. Hive location at private sites, they're unknown. But what we were told in our survey was that even though the bees are at private sites, they might be, probably are, or definitely are accessing DBCA managed land flora resources anyway, even though they're not on their sites. The hobbyist amateurs are also starting to fill the pollination services gaps. They're starting to move into that space, maybe as an alternate revenue to honey production. And again, the biosecurity risk is high for this group, same reasons as I mentioned before. So if you were considering taking that next step from hobbyist amateur to commercial, we gathered some data on the labour hours. Really, similar hours, but production needs to really pick up there. So maybe work smarter, not harder. For commercial, average number of hives was about 276, producing about 45 kilograms per hive, 16 tonne over the year, and sold 9.5 tonnes. So there may have been some stockpiling going on there. And we've assumed that 100% are selling and distributing and consuming. So they're producing about 2,700 tonne of honey harvested in this particular year anyway, the 2019-20 season. And their price range is between $9.80 to $20.40. So you've got your specialised honeys, you're also using, mixed honeys through the processes. So they've got a value between 26 and 55 million. In their future prospects, again, they're looking at close to doubling. So there's potential for an increase there too. So we gathered information on costs and revenue and also calculated gross margin. This is calculated per kilogram of honey harvested. So it's the revenue is the total from honey harvested, and so it implies an imputed honey price. I might just go through these graphs if I can for anyone who's not familiar with them. So this is the median line, so that's the middle range. You've got 50% of values above and 50% of values below that line. So within there, we've got a 50%. You've got your lower range, your lower 25%, your upper 25%. And over on the operating cost, we've got an outlier. So that's somebody who doesn't, a value that doesn't really fit within the range. So I've got a median value here of about $13 a kilo, which is implying an imputed price of honey. And the cost of about $5.40. Okay, the gross margin, we're looking at about $8.40 per kilogram. This is where a combined value through the apiarists, hobbyist-amateurs and commercial beekeepers. But we also separated them. So for the hobbyist-amateurs, we sort of feel that there's maybe some value adding going on in here, and retailing, getting a bit of a higher price. So when we compare, there's a combination of things going on here. You've got a lower cost, you've got a wider revenue range, and for commercial beekeepers, but not a lot of difference between the median values of the two. In theory, commercial beekeepers, there should be a greater difference. But often what happens is the return to capital and the own labour or family labour is not included in costs. And this has happened for the hobbyist-amateurs. There's only one hobbyist-amateur who actually included their own labour costs. So for that group, it is for the love of bees and not considered a cost. So in terms of the revenue, the difference is largely illustrated by the different distribution channels of the honey and the varieties and price received by each category. So commercial suppliers generally supplies a mixed variety honey at wholesale prices. The hobbyist-amateurs distribute through private sales and attempt to differentiate the different types of honey and gain a higher price. There's specialised sectors within the industry, and so it is predominantly honey that is providing the revenue to the beekeepers. Other honey products such as pollen, wax, royal jelly and propolis, for those that are producing that, it's providing about 13% of their revenue. And for those producing bees, so through bee reproduction, sales, queens, packaged bees and nucleus hives, it's providing about 25% of their income. And anybody offering pollination services, although it's a minor activity within the WA industry, it is providing some with about 50% of their income. In our survey, we didn't get a huge response from pollinators. We know there's not a lot of them out there, but what I can tell you what we did know. So more than 50% of them are on avocados. And when they are pollinating, they're on the Swan Coastal Plain, Jarrah Forest, and the Warren-Ibra regions. There's a low honey yield when you're offering those pollination services, which any beekeepers would know. That's why many don't want to do it. Only about 50% actually sign up for a formal contract. The average fee was about $170 per hive, and average number of hives in our data was 139 hives. And I heard last night on a podcast that over East, they need 250,000 hives in this next season, particularly for the almond industry. So we've got a long way to go if we want to get to anything like that. And only 50% had pollinated prior in the last 5 years. And looking forward, 24% of hobbyist amateurs and about 50% of commercial beekeepers were considering pollination in the next 5 years. So it could be growing, but it's not huge over here. So we can just quickly recap on the bush sites, particularly in the southwest. I'll focus on there. So there's over 4,500 DBCA registered sites, sites offered by the department. Unknown number of private sites. So back in 1991, Rob Manning, who worked for the Department of Agriculture, did a survey across the commercial beekeepers in particular to try and value the apiary sites. So he came up with about the value of $2,700 per apiary site. So 30 years on, where are we at? In our survey, we asked our participants their willingness to pay for their best site, their average site, and their worst site in regions that they use. We also asked them their willingness to accept giving up their best site, their average site, and their worst site. And in this graph, I have capped it at 30,000. So anything on 30,000 or above is sitting on that line. So Rob Manning's value in today's dollars is about $5,300 per site, and that, if I apply today's dollars, the honey would be worth $2.27. But our mean for willingness to pay is $4,300, and our willingness to accept is $4,900, almost $5,000 there. So it's as expected that the willingness to accept is higher than the willingness to pay. And the willingness to pay and accept is generally the expected profitability. So with honey prices at an all-time high, interest rates at an all-time low, we would have expected this value to be higher. Because back in 1991, the rates were around 15 to 17%. So, and if the honey production had remained the same as the 1991 productivity, I think that would work out. But it hasn't worked out that way. So if we look across the regions, distance, beekeepers have to travel further. They might value those sites less. Depends on, each region offers different honey, different burn frequency. There's a lot going on in here. But there's no significant difference across the regions except for the willingness to accept in the Warren. So with the willingness to accept being higher than the willingness to pay, it supports the endowment effect theory, which is we have it just like losing things. We have a loss aversion. So we focus on what we're losing more so than what we gain, and therefore value it accordingly. But this may partially help to explain the lack of willingness to give up any extra sites that are surplus to requirements that some beekeepers may have. But we'll touch on that some more soon. So we'd still ask the question of why is the mean value lower? We've put it down to production being lower. So 1991, there's quite a bit of production there. I had some figures written down, but it's not there. It's close to 7,000, and now we're looking at about 3,000. We asked the beekeepers because they generally describe their season as good, bad, average, or for some they didn't know. So there's no real indication of what type of year. Tristan Campbell has even attempted to define the season, and that was difficult as well. And dare we compare to New Zealand's production. So when we look at site utilisation, we asked, were there any sites you could not use due to fire, fire risk, fire-related damage, logging, and I have no idea what my notes say there. Anyway, so 5 out of the 8 regions had more than 50% of sites unproductive and unable to be used. The Mallee, Esperance, and Murchison Coolgardie were, close to or more than 60%. 60% of the sites in those regions could not be used. They were considered unproductive. And only one region, the southwest, not the southwest, sorry, Swan Coastal Plain, had more than 60% of sites used. And then we've got an unknown share, or they won't use. So they could have been lent out and shared with somebody else to use. We're just not completely sure over there. So if there's so many unproductive sites, we need to know, well, why are they unproductive? What's going on? And so 58% of the reasons was that it was, out of the beekeeper's hands. It was due to flower cycle, fire, logging, and other reasons. Only 2% have used all their sites, and the remainder of it was management decisions to run an efficient business and optimal production. If we take a look at the production after fire, we looked into that as well. So this is a fire scar map for the last 20 years across the southwest, and the apiary sites are right in there. Bush apiary sites are in bushfire zones. That's the nature of the business. There is an overlap. So we need to look at the recovery period after a fire. So we asked our participants how long it would take to return to 100% production in each region. Looking at this, you're probably not going to make it before the next burn. So when can we expect a 50% return to production? If you're lucky, you may get, it all depends on flowering cycles as well. You may or may not get 1 or 2 good harvests in there before that next fire is due. And then we also asked about, well, when would you return to the site? So yeah, this is playing a big role in that willingness, in that value of those apiary sites, because production is down, the resources degraded, it's burnt, it's logged, it's cleared, and potentially suffering from climate change. So in conclusion, the value of apiary site resources is declining over time due to degradation of resources, like I just said, fire frequency, the logging, the clearing, and the climate change. Therefore, the value of ecosystem services is declining. There is opportunity for flexibility and adaptive burning regimes that consider flowering events, the valuable honeys that are lost, and proximity to apiary sites with respect to lives and property. There's opportunity also for flexibility in registered site permits through temporary transfers, a web-based market, it's worth looking at the New Zealand fishing quotas, and transparency of vacant sites. So for this project, really much appreciation goes to BICWA, Hive Wellness, and the Department of Conservation and Attractions, and special thanks to Michael Bellman, Matt King, Gerard, Clive and James at DPIRD, and Lyndon at WAS, Mike Spurge, Mikey Sonotta at Pemberton Honeyco, and Rob Menning has also helped us. So, and a big thank you goes to all participating beekeepers. That is that.
Thank you, Cheryl. Very interesting. I learned quite a lot. So I am going to open the floor for questions, comments, but we will give priority to people from outside who want to go first. I think, Linda, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Sure. Hi, Cheryl. You're surprised that I'm asking a question. Just for context for everyone, I work in the CRC as well, and my thesis, which I'm writing now, is about beekeeper resource security. So yes, this has been very excited to hear the results, and you did a fantastic presentation. Thank you. So my question is around, I guess for context for other people, that there's a real differentiation that's seen in the price of honeys, different types of honeys, as you well know. For instance, Jarrah honey has a significant premium on pretty much all the other prices. That probably is the correlation with the high premium on the Warren region. Have you got data in that space to kind of link the types of sites, regions and the types of honeys that are predominantly produced there with the actual prices that they're achieving? Because that would be the obvious thing for me about that differentiation. Plus also, as you can see, that the beekeepers are getting back to those sites quicker, which is the extra rainfall that those zones get, and potentially the fire regime, I guess, is maybe allowing that process to be a quicker turnaround. But anyway, maybe just if you can give me some comment on that, please.
Yep. So yes, we did ask for production by region, and then we also asked about the prices, difference in prices across the regions, and we also asked on top of that prices through the distribution channel. So that's why there is such a variance in those prices. But I have the data and I can share very soon with you, I would say. Yeah. This is mentioned something else that I was going to touch on.
The other association that I noticed, you talked about sites in a lot of those more arid regions not being utilised as being unproductive, but I'm wondering whether that, because those cycles don't come back annually, they're often there's a lot of lag between them, and they also really respond to a lot of rain. I don't think that was a very good year. 1920 wasn't a very wet year, so I suspect that they weren't going to be used anyway predominantly. So I don't know whether it's influencing your results in that space.
So within the unproductive category, it also did include, not flowering.
Yeah. Okay.
It wasn't just because of fire or logging, so it was also not flowering. So if it wasn't a flowering year or something else better was flowering, and it was more worthwhile to go there.
Yeah, that's the complexity of this. It's very much associated with what's flowering in any one year. You can't look at this data across years, don't we?
The other thing we did ask was, because we need to there's very little understanding about where they go when, and so I've captured that for 2 years as well in the different regions and the months. But yeah,
okay.
It's just for those two.
Yeah, thank you. Ariel, do you want to ask your question? You have a question on how they get their stock?
Yeah, just you're saying that in WA we're able to keep our bees year round. With the other states where you said they let them die off, how do they restock their hives in the new year? Yeah,
so that's more in the north climate where it's very cold, not necessarily across Australia. So if you're looking up in America,
places like Canada, I assume.
Yeah. They let their bees die off each year. I think they keep a certain number. I think it's all under controlled conditions for them to keep, some sort of their stock through, and then they'll build up as those warmer months come.
Like some kind of controlled greenhouse or something like that.
There's something going on. I think I really can't remember the name of the person I've watched a presentation. Linda, do you recall?
Yeah, I can just make a comment here that the beekeepers in Western Australia make a lot of money, and they're doing it this year, where they literally take their hives at the end of the season and shape them into boxes and send them to Canada, where they're ready to restock their hives, and they literally make all this money out of the excess stock of the back of our season, and they ship them it's an export that happens out of Western Australia.
Someone is asking, could you just explain what willingness to pay means? Apologies for the question. That's a question. There is also another one. Maybe first have a go at explaining that for people who don't know what willingness to pay is, which is something we assume take for granted, but that's not something that's known outside the economics profession.
Mm-hmm. So in the survey, what we did was we asked them, if you were offered another site equal to your best site, how much would you pay for another one of those sites? And we did it for their best site, their average site, and their worst site in each region that they were using. And we did the same for the willingness to accept. So as if you already held the site, how much would you accept to give it up? So you can sort of gauge a bit of a value there. There's other ways of doing it through choice experiments, but we couldn't go down that path. It was too complicated for us for the beekeeping industry. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. They said there's a question from Joanne. Fantastic presentation. Did you look at the number of hives per site for commercial beekeepers?
Yes, Joe. I've got that. I've got a lot of data. I just couldn't fit it in such a short presentation. Yeah. But we're looking to have aggregated data available around that May-June mark when we need to be finished by. And so that'll be available in our report and also available online in Excel format.
Yeah. Ben has written a comment there about how they keep their bees up in Europe and North America. Any other questions?
Can I raise a question?
Yeah. Yes, Ram. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. It's quite a fantastic presentation. Thank you, first of all. My question is about something you alluded briefly, but you did not possibly elaborate that, which is around beekeeping and indigenous communities and the local industry over there. So what sort of industries are there in indigenous communities areas that rely heavily on beekeeping? If I missed something in your presentation, I'm sorry. So I want to know the link between indigenous communities and bees.
Okay. I don't know a huge amount, but I know I think they've got some doing it out towards Kalgoorlie, I believe, because the indigenous communities, they know their plants. They know what they're capable of. And I know up in the north, so years ago, 1961 actually, somebody Smith had produced the beekeeping flora resource for the southwest, but there hasn't actually been one for the northwest. So there's that information's lacking as well. But the indigenous, I know there's programs there. I don't know a lot of detail about it, but I know there's programs up in the north, and the indigenous are managing those hives. They know what their bees like and when they like it. So I'd say they're going through the same process of moving hives. And I know it's providing income and education and activities for the communities. I saw, I'm not sure, I think there may be something going on within the CRC, but I also saw there's news articles on ABC about it as well. So sorry, I'm not completely full bottle on it.
No, that's all good. Thank you.
Okay, Ariel, you have another question?
Yeah, so you were just saying before that the beehives for pollination, honey producers don't really see it as a very good business decision because they don't have the yields that would be required to run a profitable business. So And you're saying that the almond season over in the eastern states, they need 250,000 hives. Does the government play a role in having their own hives to ensure that industry is getting the pollination services, or are there specific companies that just focus on doing that and that's their core business?
That's right. That's right. Over the east, like they come from every state, Queensland, New South, Victoria, South Australia, they just hone in. And yes, government, don't quote me, but I don't think government plays a role at all. And it is up to private business. But over there, I think you'll find the price per hive will be higher that they're getting back on it. It's small over here. It's growing over here, especially with the avocado industry now starting to take off. Yeah, and the problem with pollination, particularly over here, you still need somewhere for your bees every other day of the year. So you're going between the two. You're going between the bush and the pollination. And what some find too, pollination, they lose a lot of bees. You know, depending on what crop they're on, they may be making their bees sick. You know, regardless of chemicals or not, they might not just be getting their proteins and that they need. So there's losses, and from what we hear over here, maybe the price of pollination services per hive is not high enough to warrant moving into that space yet.
Okay, Faye, do you want to ask a question? You are muted, Faye.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So great presentation, okay. Cheryl. Thank you for that. I learned a lot. My question is about the willingness to pay. So did you look at the willingness to pay or willingness to accept by the scale of operation as well as by location? And if so, is there a difference? So for example, people, for example, if they're commercialized and they have a brand, for example, so they're well-known brands and stuff like that, would they be more willing to pay? Or
I do have that in the data. Yes, I can split it out. Our response numbers within there is quite low. That is one of our problems. So I did combine them in this presentation. But yes, there's potential to separate between the categories.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Cheryl.
Thank you.
I've just got another question as well. Sorry about all the questions, but I work in the trade area, so the last week I've rung about 15 honey companies to ask if they want to work with me on initiatives in Japan and the Middle East. And as part of those conversations, in addition to getting all the dirt on all the other beekeepers and all the family, two things I generally get an earful on are the backburning issue and the logging issue. And from a state government side, it looks like the logging is no longer going to go ahead in the natural forest. So I'm just wondering if there's going to be any effort to sort of measure how that impacts or whether that improves their production going forward, given that they've flagged that that's one area where they feel that impacts on their business. And also the way that we do backburning, is there any changes in that going forward? Because I know that that's obviously you're weighing up business for the honey sector with the potential loss of life. So that's obviously always a challenging area for government to have to operate in, because the backburning is necessary to, ensure that entire communities don't burn down. But is there any discussion around how we backburn that's come up as part of this discussion? Because you've named those things and then global warming. So being able to determine what's attributing to a downturn in production is probably a real challenging thing, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Yeah. So as far as logging is concerned, yes, great news that they're going to stop or have stopped that. Linda would be able to say plenty more on that. It's going to take a long time for, if you've cut those larger trees down, it's going to take a long time for that to regenerate. So there's a long lag time there. As far as fire and burning going, that is constantly coming up for us. We've done some other analysis where we actually value the honeys and the production in each region, and we also apply the burn frequency. So we are working on that data, and that will appear in our report. But again, I just ran out of time today. I'm sorry. As far as burning and changes in that frequency and regimes, what the beekeepers want is a seat at the table to be considered in that discussion, which they haven't been before now.
Okay, thanks, Cheryl. Thanks, everyone. I will just allow for one last quick question. We are getting close to 12, and then we'll stop. Does anyone have anything they want to ask before we close? Okay, so we will stop here. Very interesting, very informative discussion. Thank you, Cheryl. And next time we will come back to hear more on this research, hopefully. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.